Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and with me today is the co-founder of The Gaggle, Ciara Haley. And we are once again fortunate to have with us Robert Barnes, notable litigator and, of course, outstanding political analyst. Well, Robert, we are just, I guess, 4 days away from the election. And it's going down to the wire. Now, you have told us that you believe you have a 75% confidence that Trump will win. So do you still have 75% confidence, or has it gone up or gone down? What's your take at this stage?
It's pretty much the same. It's the variables that of doubt are still present. They've changed in their proportionality. But they still exist. So my view is about 75% chance that Trump wins. I think it'll be one of the 4 Midwestern states that he wins. That's where it's closest. There are 6 states where I believe it's very close: New Hampshire, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. I don't think the other states that Trump won are going to be that close other than Arizona. I think Florida will be decided pretty early, North Carolina pretty early. I think Trump is in sound position in all of those places. But it's going to come down to those 6 states where it's on a razor's edge.
Okay. So just now, in terms of the razor's edge, now people are saying that he only needs to pick up one of the 3, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and he's home, as long as he holds on to everything that he held on to, everything else that he held on to in 2016. So you think that he's going to pick up one of those 3?
I mean, I actually think in the end he'll pick up 5 of the 6 that are close. So I think, but all he needs is he has 2 potential maps. Assuming he holds all those states, the Sun Belt, Arizona, Florida, and Georgia, and North Carolina, which I believe he will, means that he could either win one of the 4 Midwestern states, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Michigan, and Wisconsin, or he could lose all 4, but still win the election if he picks up New Hampshire and Nevada, which Nevada in particular has been a surprise. It looks very, very close here. So so either he has 2 alternative paths: one of the Rust Belt states, or a New Hampshire, Nevada surprise on election day.
Very interesting. I was going to ask you both. There is another great political psychic I've heard of called Alan Lichtman, and he is another great predictor of elections. He has correctly predicted every U.S. presidential since 1984. And now his cards are being laid on Biden beating Trump for this. I don't know if you guys are aware of his system. He's created the system, 13 Keys to the White House. And he goes beyond polling. He doesn't take that into account. He doesn't believe pundits, or he doesn't look at speeches, but he has 13 distinct means to assess the president. And what it comes down to is basically the incumbent being judged by their record. And that's all that matters, according to his system. Now, he has said his prediction for this year's race is Biden, and he's had that opinion since August. Has not changed, much like yourself, Robert. So what I wanted to ask about his system is that he sees Trump as having some significant failures, significant enough to cause what he calls a political earthquake, meaning that the White House will be overturned and it will change hands into the Democratic Party's hands. So with his predictions, I wanted to ask you what you think about certain aspects of the criteria. For example, he has the positive aspects and attributes being there's no contest against Trump, no in-party contest during the nomination. It's a president who is seeking re-election. There's no third-party challenger. That's all in Trump's favor. But there were lots of scandals that happened during the White House this year, the impeachment being one of them. The foreign and the military aspect, there's been no great failures, but also no great successes. And the charisma of Trump, he argues, appeals only to a small, very fervent base. and that base is not big enough to have an impact on the vote. So, for example, like I would say, Roosevelt and Reagan had way more than 60% of the country's support, whereas recent studies have shown that 60% of the American people don't trust Trump and are suspicious of him in general. So, given this criteria, Robert, if you'd like to comment or push back on any of his predictions for the outcome.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things with Lichtman. One, the main flaw with Lichtman's system is it's highly subjective. So to give you it's just not, he doesn't have objective metrics. And Lichtman, if you follow his Twitter account, hates Trump obsessively.
Yeah, he does, but he did predict his win in 2016, even then he hated him.
The only caveat there is he issued actually two different opinions. In August, earlier he predicted Hillary. He changed his mind in late September. So that's where, also in 2000 he mostly picked Gore. So his self-celebrated success has some caveats to it. That's the one thing. But here's a classic example. So according to Lichtman's viewpoint, Obama had no scandals at all. Well, that's a very convenient interpretation of Obama's scandals. And that Obama only had foreign policy successes, no failures. That's a very convenient interpretation of Obama. A lot of people would disagree. So in Lichtman's world, having no new wars, being the first president to have no new wars since Jimmy Carter, is not considered a foreign policy success. But overthrowing, having Benghazi and the problems with Libya is not a sign of foreign policy failure. So all you have. Another example is on the economy. So if you look at the Oxford GDP model, or you just, the Gallup question, do you think you're better off more so than 4 years ago? By that objective metric, Trump would check off both of those boxes on Lichtman's keys. Lichtman chooses to ignore that data and focus on data that's negative. So he's become so selective. He has some good keys. The problem is they're very subject to interpretation. So in my view, from a voting perspective, like, for example, Richard Barris at People's Pundit has been asking people, who do you think is going to be better at keeping us out of war? That, to me, is the most important foreign policy key. If it was rephrased in that manner, Trump is winning that question all across the Midwest, that they think he is more likely to keep us out of war than Biden. Biden actually reinforced that in the debate by talking about how he would be tougher on nuclear powers, Russia and North Korea. Why that's a good thing is beyond me. But so I think if we look at how people think the economy is going, how people think about war, in those areas, Trump is strongly favored. And a classic example is like he's trying to one of his metrics has always been, does one candidate have more charisma than the other? He's trying to pretend Trump doesn't have more charisma than Biden. There's no objection.
In fairness, I think he gives both of them black marks for charisma.
And that's where he's just biased. In other words, you can disagree and dislike Trump, but Trump has the best ratings of any presidential person in history. Trump is dominating Google search engines, dominating TV ratings, dominating social media metrics. There's another professor that all he does is he has no political bias of any kind, just looks at social media metrics, predicted the New Zealand elections in some freakish way, the Australian elections before that. He says the social media metric elections predict Trump easy. And of course, hasn't changed his model, which is a purely objective model. And that's the utility of it. It's what's the percentage of the vote in the presidential primaries. That's what he's going to be. That's who's going to be the winner. So my view is Lichtman will end up discrediting himself badly by being so misinterpreting his own keys in ways that people won't listen to in the future. And a classic example of my view is Trump hasn't really had scandals related to the White House. The impeachment was so political. That, to me, is not really the kind of scandal people are thinking about. I think the kind of scandal he's thinking about is really unusual ones, Teapot Dome kind of scandal, Watergate kind of scandal. Scandal where both parties would agree, that's a scandal, even if they don't agree on its consequences. And by his definition, W lying us into war was not a scandal somehow. Obama, Fast and Furious, Benghazi, Tea Party, all being one thing after another. None of those somehow were scandals. So I think he has shown TDS has infected, Trump derangement syndrome has infected all the professional class. But unfortunately, I think it has virally killed off Lichtman's keys.
Yes. Well, that's a very interesting point because the corruption thing is often repeated about Trump. Oh, Trump is corrupt, but nobody ever really cites any example of Trump's corruption, because the fact that he gets even the Qatar government buys an apartment in one of the Trump buildings, that isn't corruption. They are paying market rates, and Trump isn't pursuing a particularly pro-Qatar policy. In fact, he's backed Saudi Arabia against Qatar. So, these are the kind of things that people are often citing as, oh, Trump is corrupt. But in fact, they haven't shown. And even the whole emoluments clause, there's been no evidence that, in fact, Trump has violated the emoluments clause. So this is a kind of a conventional wisdom. Oh, well, Trump is corrupt. But just as the conventional wisdom that, well, Obama was a very clean administration, and as you pointed out, Robert, it certainly wasn't, and particularly in light of now what we have found out both about spying on the Trump campaign, undermining the Trump campaign and the Trump presidency, plus everything that we're now learning about the Biden family antics. So so these are kind of conventional wisdoms that people like Lichtman just purveyors of.
And I think one of the things that the problem that Democrats have had is they hate Trump so much that they put labels on him, and they think those labels work in independent middle America. No one was ever going to believe that Trump was running for office to get richer, because the guy got poorer by going for office, and everybody kind of knew it. And so, like, when they pretend he was really broke and he was really bankrupt and he was really, all he did was lose his money and all he did was inherit money and he's secretly running for the White House to get rich, ordinary people were never going to buy that. And it was a bad pitch. I mean,
Robert, do you not think that the release of his tax records changed anything?
No, because everybody knew Trump wasn't paying taxes. I know criminal tax cases. Most people believe that all the super rich don't pay taxes already.
Yeah.
And once Trump didn't disclose his returns out of the gate, they knew that was the case about Trump. So and that's where it's another example. Trump created more scrutiny on himself by running for office. In other words, nobody's going to be looking at his tax returns if he doesn't. So that's where we have had such a bad history in America, including the Bushes, of politicians getting rich off of being elected. Trump's the first guy since John Kennedy to be rich before he got elected and to get poorer while he was elected. Now, John F. Kennedy might not have got poorer while he was elected, but that's another story. The Kennedy family. But at least they made their money the old-fashioned way. They stole it before they got to office. Right. I think that was one of the limitations. They have a caricature of Trump that never stuck. It was always like the Russiagate stuff. Middle America was never going to believe that Trump was secretly hates America and is an agent of the Russians. That was always only Democrats who hate him were going to believe that. It was a incredulous attack line, and so I think that's what Lichtman's keys reflect, and I think we'll find out on election day. But I think he's shown himself to be too subjective in his interpretation of his own data, and it's because they don't have objective limits.
I would also ask or wonder, though, just reflecting back on the events of the year and the amount of social unrest we witnessed, protests and Black Lives Matter movement, etc., that surely leaves a mark on the electorate and the potential voters, does it not?
It does. And I think the problem, I've never liked that particular metric of Lichtman's, social unrest, because it's who's causing the social. I mean, put it this way, social unrest. There was a lot of social unrest when Nixon won with ease in 1972. And arguably, we'd had more social unrest leading up to that election than ever. I mean, Weather Underground was at its peak, everything related to it. And yet somehow that didn't count in Lichtman's stand. That's why I have problems with how he applies these. They tend to be a convenient redefinition. And that's the nature of subjectivity, becomes eye of the beholder. And I think that's the limitation of it. And now I think as a net, probably the net effect of the social unrest will help Trump. That's why Biden's begging people to stop rioting in Philadelphia right now. Yeah. So here you have this swing state, and folks are deciding to loot stores and torch places. At least, what I told my friends on the left is we've been through this before. Whenever there's been major social unrest in America, it has favored the law and order party. That's just the way your middle American tends to respond. They don't say, hey, I want to join and go out in the streets. They're like, I don't really want to be with those people. The only time they've really joined the rebels was the Revolutionary Era itself. But since then, they want to stay safe. They may not tell pollsters that. They may be nice and polite. I think that same thing is happening in response to the lockdown. I think nobody wants to say, I don't care if grandma dies.
Yeah.
But down deep, they're like, I want to get back to normal. I don't want my kid on Zoom classes. I'm going insane here. I think that's what's going to end up happening. I think there's going to be some real surprises on Election Day with people who are really mad about the lockdowns that haven't been telling the pollsters.
But I wonder, Robert. I mean, I take your point about 1968, the disturbances, really very serious riots in 68. Richard Nixon ran on the law and order platform, and then, as you say, 72, Weather Underground was at its height. But is it possible? I don't know. I'm just asking. Is it possible that America has changed? It's not the same country it was in 68 and 72. And so while, America had a much tougher attitude towards rioting, tougher attitude towards looting and any kind of these radical movements, separatism, whatever, back in 68, 72. I mean, that was a time when Ronald Reagan was governor in California, George Wallace was down in Alabama, you had Mayor Daley in Chicago. You don't really have those people anymore. America is a different place from what it was then. So maybe law and order will not necessarily work in Trump's favor.
I'll give two counters to that. One is lived experience. A year ago, before all of this got really crazy, I had a jury trial in Milwaukee, a very compelling civil rights case, where before the certain unrest happened in Milwaukee, 90% of jurors were ruling in favor of my client. As the case progressed, I could tell there were problems with the jury pool reaction. We ended up settling the case. We were about to lose 12-0 on a case that was a guaranteed winner. And I realized the backlash had already begun. So a bunch of people, as they would disbelieve, even if it was on video, they got to the point where they disbelieved video evidence if it pushed a narrative that reminded them at all of a BLM narrative, even though it had been much smaller scale in Milwaukee compared to what's happening now. And by the way, half of those jurors were Democrats. So that was a sign to me that, oh, wow, there's something coming. And we see it in behavior. So if the country was more progressive or the country was more embracing of these protests, then we would have seen it show up in voter registration trends, in primary participation for some of those primaries that happened after. It's like the state of Washington had a primary in August. Sean Trende uses it as his measurement of what's going to happen. It was more Republican than it had been in 2016. And historically, however Washington State's August gubernatorial primary goes is how the country trends. That's the reason why he looked at it. Voter registration has trended all Republicans since July in pretty much every state that has party registration. So I always focus on behavior. What are people doing? They may say different things, but what are they doing? And all their behavior says a backlash is coming. I've been trying to tell my friends on the left in the civil rights movement. I now, if I go in and pick a jury, I got to have no Republicans on that jury, no independents on that jury, and I have to even be careful about which Democrats I pick on that jury, because a bunch of them, they're the kind of folks who, when they drive through certain neighborhoods, they may give donations, but then they lock their doors quickly when they see people of a certain complexion. So it's that mindset is surging, and it's going to be a problem. And there's a reason why people are moving out of San Francisco, moving out of New York City. It's not because if they really embraced either lockdown politics or protest, you would see them being more committed, more active. Instead, they're doing just the opposite. They're either moving out, they're not registering to vote, they're registering Republican, they're only tuning in to watch. Like a third of young people, young Democrats, didn't watch the debates that did watch in 2016.
But then why isn't, if that's all true, why isn't Trump doing better? I mean, we've had riots, we've had looting, arson, we've had the lockdown, outrageous lockdown, just, shutting down economies throughout the country, which Trump has sort of opposed. Why isn't he doing better?
I think he is. I think the polls are just not detecting it. And there have been a few canaries in the coal mine in the polls. So, for example, generally speaking, when there's a class-based movement in American politics, it actually tends to be cross-racial. What you're seeing is what they've been picking up in polls of African Americans and Latinos, particularly men, is a Trump surge compared to 2016. they're not picking up the rural working class. My view is when you have a class-based movement in America, it's not going to be limited to African-American Latino voters, particularly as it relates to Trump. If you have African-American and Latino working class men under 45 trending Trump by double digits compared to 2016, you can guarantee their white non-Hispanic rural brethren are of the same inclination. So I think people are going to be surprised. Like here in Nevada, there's a Democratic-oriented reporter, John Ralston, and he's been shocked at the massive rural working class turnout for Trump. Trump may even set a record. I think we're going to see 1948, the sequel, and I think it will be even more. And that was a bunch of working class voters overwhelmingly pouring out for Trump. I think the same thing is going to happen for Trump. The other component is Norwegian voters. Richard Barrett's doing those polls up north. Norwegian voters overwhelmingly going Trump. I mean, these are voters that ancestrally Democratic. They're voting for Trump by 3-1 margins. And that's the biggest anti-war voting group in the country. I think especially what Biden's little let's go to war with North Korea line helped seal the deal with that vote up north. And it's because the Democratic Party doesn't even understand it. When Glenn Greenwald is out having to resign from the publication he himself founded because the media is so nuts and in the bag for Biden because it's so co-opted by a deep state apparatus, that tells you how bad it is on the Democratic side. And at least historically, voters like Norwegian voters or northern working class New Hampshire and Maine voters tend to recognize that a lot more than the pollsters and the press think they do.
Yeah, I would say I agree that the polls themselves are like taking a snapshot of a horse race, and at different times, depending on how you look at it, someone looks ahead, someone looks behind, whatever. But at the end of the day, the result is going to be the result. And I also think what may have been underestimated is the shy Trump voting element, because you can tell a pollster one thing and then on election day you can tick a different box. There's no kind of legality, meaning that you have to poll what you're going to vote on the day. And some people also just don't know what they're going to vote on the day until they're faced with the ballot page. How much of a factor do you think it would be that just there are people who are not declaring or undecided as to their Trump vote, and this kind of shy Trump or secret Trump supporter, is that much of an element in the election? Do you think, Robert?
Yes, and in particular parts of the country. We've had 2 prior elections where somebody was considered totally uncouth to vote for. And one was Barry Goldwater in 1964. The next was Ronald Reagan in 1980. Both of them their polls badly underestimated their votes. So even though Goldwater got crushed, he was predicted to lose by a much, much bigger margin. The polls were off on average you had less than 30% of the people say they were going to vote for Goldwater the whole election. Then he almost breaks 40 on election day. So clearly, and it wasn't because the southern part of the vote was bashful. It was because the northern part of the working middle class America was bashful about voting for Goldwater. And in 1980, Carter led the polls all the way. And I think in part, again, quote unquote, respectable opinion in middle class suburbs. And we live in an era, the social dilemma era, where so much social media influence shapes what people feel it's okay for them to say. That I think that's been reinforced. There's more evidence of a shy Trump vote. Richard Barris has been polling it. 2/3 of every state he polls of people say, yes, there's a shy Trump voter. Yeah. So that's how much there is. And that's probably accounts for 3 to 4 points in the polls just by itself. I mean, the biggest problem with the polls is who's not responding to them. But they're not getting rural working class older voters. But it's enhanced this year. Because there's tons of people who have emailed me, messaged me, well-regarded, usually they're professionals, upper middle class in a Democratic area or a swing state, who have told me that they can't tell anybody that they're voting for Trump because that's just not. And there's going to be some people for whom it's just a rebellious action. Somehow Trump, the guy's a billionaire and he's getting punk stars and rappers to endorse him as the anti-establishment guy. I mean, you have a billionaire from New York, TV celebrity, incumbent president, and somehow he still made himself the rebel. It's the best version of branding in presidential re-election politics I've ever seen.
Yeah. But just going back, I mean, I've noticed that you've said very strong things about Nate Silver. Do you actually think that people like Nate Silver, are they doing it deliberately? Is it a conspiracy what they're doing? I mean, are they trying deliberately to drive down the Trump vote?
You know what they're doing is they're employing the model the U.S. employs in the rest of the world. So, you come up with some fake polls, you come up with some fake exit polls, you create a narrative that says this candidate couldn't have won legitimately. They did Evo Morales. We now know, of course, clearly Morales did win legitimately because, there's a classic example. Bolivian polls just off by 20 points, 20-point error. They were predicting that it was clearly going to be a runoff. The Morales party was going to get 30% of the vote if they were lucky. Oh, they got 53% on election day. Right. Now, I think clearly, yes, I think Nate Silver is doing it deliberately. I always say that when people accuse you of something that's like totally out of the left field and totally weird, just listen carefully because they'll be confessing their own crimes. The telltale heart has a tendency to just want to be disclosed. And I think that's Nate Silver has been attacking people unusually, even more so than normal, saying that they're faking their numbers. And that told me, he wants or is encouraging, inviting, or knows about his favorite pollsters faking their numbers. And he's already even put it out this past weekend. If Trump wins, he suggested the only real reason, he said maybe there could be a polling error, but the only real reason must be that Trump stole it. So he's already previewing this narrative that he just cannot accept. And in fact, this is the whole history of the United States and most of the world. The establishment in every country just doesn't accept a populist winning. That's why they still can't accept the idea, just as the Venezuelan elites cannot accept the idea that Hugo Chavez was just legitimately popular in working class Venezuela, or that Evo Morales and his party was just legitimately popular amongst the indigenous majority of Bolivia. And this is true. This goes back to Huey Long in the United States, Jim Folsom in the United States, Jimmy Curley in Boston, the Rascal King, as they called him. Populist politicians have a long history where they just cannot accept the idea. And this was Truman really in 48. People kind of forget this. But the establishment New York opinion was, how would this no-name guy from Missouri, this classless individual, be popular in the country? He just can't be. And so I think they can't accept it. So I think Silver is encouraging fake polls, inflated Biden margins, so that they can run with a narrative that Trump stole it if Trump wins.
Well, so this really gets us to the heart of what happens on Tuesday, because if it is going to be close, then we know what's going to happen next. It's just as you said, and that's what happens in foreign countries. It happened in Ukraine, Georgia, Yugoslavia before that, which is fake. It's fake. Whoever you don't like, whether it's Yanukovych, Milosevic, they obviously stole the election. So this is going to happen here in the United States. So that, well, how could Trump possibly have won? Look at all the polls said that he was going to lose by a huge margin. So what happens then?
I think Trump needs to win by what I call a sort of margin of fraud cushion, rather than because if he wins by 2 or more in enough in more than 270 electoral votes, then he'll have the best cushion against legal action. They'll still claim he stole it, but that claim has less credibility. But if it's close, we're going to have a legal war, and they're going to allege it's stolen, and we're much close. And they've already been sort of planting the seeds. I mean, all these stories about, hey, military, will you please, walk Trump out of the White House? I mean, these kind of stories, which are crazy, crazy stories. But it's just like early 2017, when you have publications like Foreign Affairs, part of the Council of Foreign Relations, putting out the idea that maybe the 25th Amendment could remove Trump, or maybe this could remove Trump. I mean, they were saying that from the moment he got elected, and then they tried it with Russiagate and Ukraine-gate and everything else. So there's no way they're going to accept Trump winning. And they've been convincing themselves that it's just not going to happen. So when it does happen, there's going to be a shock. But I think given what Nate Silver is talking about, they're clearly planning on trying to discredit his election again. The question is, how long can you wage war on the American people and get away with it? And it reminds me a lot of the 1970s. I mean, that's when, the culmination of the assassinations of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, people were like, something is wrong here. And ultimately it fell apart after Watergate, and the whole sort of deep state apparatus was the only time they were meaningfully put under scrutiny in America. So how much of a gamble, but they're so out of touch. They're so disconnected that I think they're willing to. It's the reason why, I don't mind, the Kissingers of the world, in the sense that I don't trust his moral compass, but I didn't distrust his intellect. Now we have people with a broken moral compass who aren't smart. And that's a dangerous, a history of governments that collapse quickly or get into foolish civil wars or World War I. It's all when you combine dumb people with corrupt people. And unfortunately, I think we have a lot of that in the deep state apparatus today.
Yes.
I see. Yeah. And Robert, do you think then, so I think there's not going to be a conclusive answer because I think it will be quite close. And if it is close, I think it's going to be contested by, I think, both sides, depending on the result, because I also know there's been a lot of talk around fraudulence with the mail-in ballots and the early voting from the Democrat side of things, and a lot of doubt cast over the legitimacy of counting those ballots. And I think the count itself is going to take a long, long time. I don't know if you agree, George or Robert.
It all depends on the margin. So if Trump is a big enough margin, then no one's going to try to steal it, because it's too easy to get caught, and why take the gamble if it's not going to flip the script? And that's where Trump's advantage is so many states. New Hampshire, and if he wins New Hampshire and Nevada, then if he wins any combination that gets into 270 plus, people in the other states won't try to steal it anyway, even if it's really close in those states. Wisconsin has a pretty clean record. The states that will be the hottest will be Pennsylvania because of Philadelphia and Michigan because of Detroit. If you remember the recount lawsuits that Jill Stein filed in 2016, that suddenly stopped when her funders got nervous because in Detroit they were finding precincts with more votes than voters. And so they can't afford that problem to get too much public scrutiny. So if it's razor thin, you're absolutely right. It's going to be the legal war it's going to make Bush v. Gore look like a walk in the park. It's going to be the ultimate legal political war. My biggest concern is that a lot of people on that side of the sort of what I call deep state institutional aisle don't understand the limits of their actions and may push things in a direction that can't be pulled back. I also don't think they fully appreciate that if populists on the right begin to feel like populists on the left, which is totally futile, and being in the political process, giving them the change they need, that's never a script for good things happening down the road. People who feel they can't change the world democratically look for other ways to change the world.
Yeah. So, but let's say we now get to, let's say it is close, and we go to Pennsylvania, and then we start the vote counting. And so we do the same that we did with so we did what we did with Minnesota with Al Franken. We just count and count and count. We find new votes here, new votes there. How do we control this? And
I had hoped the Supreme Court would step in and say all the ballots have to be in by Election Day, because that would at least limit that risk. Unfortunately, they did not. Now, in Minnesota, they have to be in by Election Day. In Wisconsin, they have to be in by Election Day. I believe in Michigan, they have to be in by Election Day. That's where I'm hoping that I don't think we'll get a lot of shenanigans out of Pennsylvania if Trump wins one of the other three. But if he doesn't, Nevada has up to 14 days to count ballots. Pennsylvania, at least, it's 3 extra days. North Carolina, I think it's 10 extra days. That's where we could get, if it's too close, it's going to be a war of all wars. And it's going to, the hanging Chad debate of 2000, this could make that look small. And you're going to have, and at least from early voting, if they have unusual turnout trends, in other words, if some reason North Philly has the highest black turnout in all of America, people are going to be wondering whether, is that because they actually turned out to vote, or is that because somebody just decided to put a ballot in their box? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the great concern. And but I think Trump has been so aggressive on it that they're a little scared to do it. It's for people around the world, this is the way to try to fight corruption or fraud, to get ahead of the curve and predict it in advance, because then that deters them from doing it. And on the left side, they'll say voter suppression. I just don't see a lot of evidence of that. I get the argument about not allowing people to send in or have their ballot received after Election Day, but that's been the law for forever. And the pandemic doesn't stop you from delivering your ballot to the local election office. So I'm just not really sold on that side. There's already other arguments. denying felons the right to vote, other efforts in certain places where you can make an argument. But more and more, that's not the case in the United States. If it won't be voter suppression that costs Democrats the election if it's low turnout, it will be nominating Joe Biden. Next time, don't nominate the pro-crime bill, 40 years of corrupt, pro-war guy as your nominee. And don't have him pick Kamala Harris as his de facto president. Literally the biggest slap in the face to the millennial left that you could possibly do. And AOC can try to put as many pretty faces on it as she wants. She knows her own audience isn't voting. And so far in early voting, we're looking at the lowest African-American turnout in North Carolina since before Jesse Jackson ran for president in 1984. So they're just not interested. And that's why you're seeing rap stars endorse Trump and other people. There's just a low level of interest for Biden amongst the millennial populist left. And the Democrats slap them in the face again. And just like 2000, they may pay the price for it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most interesting sections of society that I would like to watch. The millennial section and the disappointment vote, I would call it.
Well, exactly. And not only that, fascinating thing Richard Barris is picking up, the surge for Jorgensen as a libertarian candidate is coming from the millennial left.
Yeah.
So the core, your average Jorgensen voter is a millennial minority person who identifies as unaffiliated and ideologically to the left. So in Arizona,
also the Green Party candidate.
Yeah, because what it is the Democrats thought if we remove the Green Party from a bunch of states like Pennsylvania and other states, that all those voters will flock to Biden. Not happening. They're just picking Jorgensen instead. And so like in Arizona, where pot is on the ballot, the primary source of Jorgensen support is people who are only turning out to vote on pot. They so dislike Biden or so could care less about Biden that, and again, record low levels of enthusiasm for a presidential candidate, that they're actually willing to vote libertarian rather and let Trump win than because they're not really that core millennial left populist. They don't like Trump, but they're not obsessed with hatred of Trump. They see the system as Tweedledum, Tweedledee, sort of a Caitlin Johnstone kind of approach. And I think you're going to see the same thing. And they're going to lose again because of minority votes, because of necessarily of white votes, because of African-American and Latino voters not voting the Democratic ticket. Because it turns out, identity politics doesn't work that way in working class America, no matter the color of your skin.
What percentage of the African-American vote do you think Trump is going to win? What kind of number are you expecting?
So I think last time it was 6 to 7%. Now it depends on your metric because African-American voter precincts that are all African-American are disproportionately lower income and urban, and that's a more Democratic audience. So your African-American conservative or unaffiliated voter tends to be in a racially mixed neighborhood. So we don't have easy precinct data to measure them, and exit polls have been notoriously erroneous. My estimate is that he probably won 6 to 7%. He doubled Romney's number from 2012 of the African-American vote. And almost all of that came from African-American men, particularly working class African-American men who don't identify as Democratic, usually unaffiliated. I think he's going to double that margin amongst that voter group this time. I think he's going to get somewhere between 12 to 15% of working class African-American men that are under the age of 50. Your older African Americans still remember the Democratic Party as a civil rights party. That's how they're going to vote. Your African American women think it should be considered a crime or a sin to vote for Trump. So they're going to stay in the same segments they are. But your working class African American men are going to vote more for Trump than any Republican since Richard Nixon, probably.
Right. But what about the white vote? I mean, Trump is obviously losing some of the white vote. What is the white vote? Is this the college-educated whites that he's losing, the suburban whites? Is that it? Or he's obviously losing some of the vote that he got in 2016 among whites.
I think it varies. So I think that in certain parts of the country, he's going to win back. He'll win more white vote. So I think in Florida, I think throughout the Midwest, I think New Hampshire, Nevada, he'll actually do better. The typical white voter he's losing is an upper middle class, post-college educated white voter, particularly who lives on the coast. That's where he'll do 3 to 5 to 7 points worse because that voter group is realigning. The Bill Kristols of the world are realigning to the Democratic Party. Now, what that's doing is making the Democratic Party more neocon, more pro-war, and it's driving out the left. So I think its net effect will be negative for the Democratic Party. Amongst non-college whites, particularly high school educated whites, Trump is looking like he will run 3 to 5 points better than he did in 2016. And amongst religious conservative middle-class suburbanite voters, he's going to do better. Places like the Wow counties in Wisconsin, places like the Dutch Reformed group of Western Michigan, the same with what they call the Pennsylvania Dutch in places like Lancaster and York counties, Pennsylvania. Your Ben Shapiro type is coming home to Trump. And libertarian Republican, people like Clay Travis, people like Dave Rubin, coming home to Trump. None of them voted for Trump 2016. And they're representative and reflective of a constituency that they have broad public support for in their platforms. And then your Tim Pools of the world are voting for Trump. I mean, that's someone that if I was a Democratic candidate, you can't lose that kind of voter. And what he represents is sort of your millennial, populist-leaning, usually left-leaning voter who finds the identity politics and social censorship a bad idea. So in politics, Kevin Phillips always used to say for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. In exchange for winning more professional class voters in states that frankly just don't matter from an electoral college perspective, they're going to lose a whole bunch of groups: religious conservative middle class, libertarian middle class, and younger working class that they would have otherwise had a shot at in states where it does matter. That's why I think, in fact, there's polling even by the New York Times that says Biden is going to get a historically low margin of votes out of Philadelphia. He'll do better in the nice parts and the tonier parts of Montgomery and Chester and Delaware. The folks who get their latte at Starbucks to start their morning. But for the folks that start their morning off with a beer at the local bar, that vote's going to heavy Trump. And the problem for Biden is there's a lot more of those voters in swing states than there are latte liberals.
Yeah. All right. So Tuesday night, what's the first thing we should be looking out for? What will be the first indications of the final outcome?
Key working class areas in places like Central Virginia, places like Northern Maine, places like the Panhandle in North Central Florida and sort of Gator country, old Burt Reynolds 1970 movie style in the South Central part of the state of Florida. I believe those places are going to have the highest turnout we've maybe ever seen, at least in the modern presidential era. And so if you're seeing this big rural working class roll out for Trump in those kind of places in parts of North Carolina, you can expect that trend to happen all across the country, and it means Trump will have a safer margin than expected. So that's the places I'm looking at, not only Trump's margin, but whether turnout is up in specific areas. And then if turnout is down in places like the core urban north of Philadelphia, parts of Trenton and Newark and New Jersey, parts of other areas like that across the country, then that means trouble for Biden. So because those voter groups tend to vote together, you can know by what precincts in northern Boston are going to do. Once you know that, you know how Philly and Detroit and Milwaukee and Minneapolis and those same kind of urban African-American precincts are likely to vote across the board. And at least the early voting cues are all in that way. Like the two surprises have been a surge of rural working class voters in early voting states like Florida and Nevada, and a unusual, surprising decline amongst African-American vote and younger millennial minority vote and Latino vote in Florida and Nevada. So if that is a nationwide trend, it's going to be trending Trump. And so those will probably be some of the best places. If you see places like Central Virginia are competitive in the congressional districts, like Virginia 5, Virginia 7, which have a real mix of populations, then it's going to be a good Republican night writ large. I used in 2018, when those numbers came in pro-Democrat, I knew to dump my bet on the House. So it's the same dynamic here. So there'll be a lot of play because American politics is very correlated. You don't have, this is like the problem with pollsters and other political forecasters like Nate Silver and other people saying Trump could do better in Florida and somehow get crushed. Well, since 1968, however Florida has trended, Michigan and Pennsylvania have trended the exact same direction. They've never been disattenuated. So the idea that somehow Michigan is going to be 10 points plus for Biden, but Florida 2 points more for Trump, that just never happens in America. So how you see those states is how all the states are going to go, especially if you look at certain demographics. You have unique populations. You know, how the Cubans go in Florida is not going to tell you how Mexicans are going to go in West Texas. But how working class whites go in Central Florida, because a lot of them are retirees from Michigan, from Pennsylvania, from Wisconsin, tell you a lot. Same with upstate New York. Upstate New York will tell you a lot. Northern New Hampshire and northern Maine, that will tell you probably how the Norwegians are going to vote in Minnesota and Wisconsin, because they tend to be just an anti-war vote. There's like the biggest anti-war vote in America comes from those places. How they trend together. They never trend opposite of one another when war is a potential issue in an election.
So Robert, at that point, that's the point of relaxation for you when you start calculating those winnings and what you're going to spend them on.
When I was in Ireland in 2016, I actually went to sleep because the time lapse is so different. I was like, yeah, I think I'm in the bag. I saw some early results. I had a bunch of media friends texting me because they saw the exit polls, and the exit poll said Hillary easy, and they were saying you got to get out of the betting markets, go down there right now and change your bet. And I was like, no, I'm not worried about exit polls. I said, in fact, I like what I'm seeing in some of the early vote data. And I just went to sleep, woke up, and it was over, and I just got to watch the rebroadcast of all the crying by the media. So
I'm sure then you got out to Temple Bar, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah, Dublin was great. The great working class town, one of the last true Irish towns that has a working class heart to it. So many of the other places around the world have become professionalized. Unfortunately, I had planned on being in Ireland this time around, but all the books are closed because of another lockdown rule. And then all British bookies won't take my money. Apparently, they didn't like what happened in 2016, so they said, you know, they did it very diplomatically and polite in that English manner. They kept, giving me the runaround as to why. They're just like, yeah, you can just stay home, Bobby, and stay home I will. But I'll some bets here in the States, and so not as much as 2016, but either way, it's going to be a lot closer than the polls say. Trump will definitely overperform. He may way overperform. And that would be the biggest sense, other than 48. People forget 1980. Reagan had won early, but the night before, everybody thought Carter was going to win. So I don't think we're going to see anything like a 1980 margin for Trump, but those days are past. But I think the people it'll be fun watching the shock as these people that hate have to let their working class rural betters teach them about how elections really work.
Yeah, well, I remember that election night in 2016, that moment when Megyn Kelly said, when Wisconsin was declared for Trump, the blue wall has crumbled, and that was it. That was the moment. That was just before he was actually declared the winner. But the blue wall has crumbled, and you knew that's it. It's over.
What's amazing, the Democrats still don't understand that blue wall was an anti-war wall. Nice. That's what formed. I mean, it started in 2004 because before then it was inconsistent which way those states went, and because they didn't like war. That's what started. That's what made those states more democratic than the rest of the country. And Democrats abandoned that. I mean, they really haven't followed through on their promises all the way through, but just have completely abandoned that the last two elections. Just putting up the most pro-war candidates they've ever put up, in my view. I mean, and so, well, outside, I guess, of Woodrow Wilson, World War I, God bless him. So I think maybe they'll learn their lesson, but maybe they won't. Maybe they'll still be in denial and pretend that the whole country is just a bunch of crazy racists, or Trump somehow secretly stole it, or maybe Putin's really the master of us all and somehow manipulated all these rural blue-collar voters to vote for the Rusty Hat candidate. Whatever craziness they will embrace. For all the crazy theories the right had about Obama and about Clinton, it gets nowhere near the conspiracy theories the media has embraced to go after Trump. They believe the nuttiest notions on the planet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a bad way to lick one's wounds, Robert.
Yes, exactly. Now, the privileges, I love betting against arrogant rich people. I mean, my goal in life has always been to redistribute money and power from arrogant, powerful people to more humble, simple folks. And I'm Robin Hood. Sometimes I just keep Robin Hood's wealth myself. But
I'll say Robin Hood with a cigar in his hand.
Yeah, there you go. And so it'd be so beautiful to see these elite people lose not only their pride and their reputation, but a little bit more of their money on election night should Trump prevail again.
But do you think they'll go quietly into that good night, or will there be just all hell was going to break loose? Violent streets and so on.
I hope not violence in the streets, but they're already planning for it in Minnesota. So in New York, they're already in D.C. There are nice shops. So what does that tell you? So
that's a very good indication that they're expecting a Trump win. Because if they're boarding everything up, they're expecting a Trump victory.
That's why Joe Biden is flying to Minnesota this weekend, not Georgia or Texas. They all know that there's trouble in brewing. The early vote has reinforced that in the key states where it's been a useful barometer. A lot of states, it's hard to predict. But Florida, North Carolina, Nevada have been pretty predictive in the past. And so and that shows you where their mindset is. And at least the history, what I told people in 2017 that were in Trump world said, study American populists and how the system has responded to them. You're going to see it happen again. And I think my friends on the right who think the media will just accept this, or Democratic Party or political establishment will accept this, no, they won't. Look at, when Huey Long won, they doubled down in his attacks. When Big Jim Folsom won, they doubled down in the attacks. When Jimmy Curley won re-election, they doubled down in the attacks. So the attacks are only going to escalate and accelerate. I think that's the scary thing. Well, we'll see more big tech censorship. We'll see more attempts to control and gatekeep the narrative. And they'll see how far they can go and get away with it before they step back. That's the sad thing.
Yeah. Well, it happened in the case of George Wallace, who was a populist. Leave aside his view on the Civil Rights Act. He had a very populist economic message. Look what happened. And of course, Nixon was always a populist. Ever since he started, in his political career, he always, the champion of the little guy as against the elites. Which just kind of explains a lot of the hatred that was directed toward Nixon.
Yeah, I think the way Kevin Phillips put it is they were mink coat Republicans, not fur coat Republicans.
That's it. Yeah.
So and it was very much that mind. It was very much a middle class. He was representing the sort of new Catholic and other groups that had come into America. He himself being from a Quaker roots and origin, so he was sort of outside the religious mainstream, making it into economic life, achieving it. And the system never respected him for that. He was not a man. He was not a Harvard man. And as always said, it was all the Harvard. It was all the best and the brightest. To steal from Jesse Jackson, he used to say the Ivy League's not the best and the brightest. It's the richest and the whitest. I didn't have that. The last word of it didn't come across as resonant for me, but or it wasn't as resonant when I did the audience. But I thought it was deeply true. When I left Yale in protest many years ago, it was creating an elite culture and an elite class that reminds me of the clerical class of the Inquisition era, the same class that gave us World War I and banking collapses in the 19-teens and 20s. And what did that birth? That birthed fascism and communist revolution and statism of the most horrendous moral kind that we've ever witnessed in world history. So hopefully it doesn't happen again, but we have the same incompetent elites in control. And the only check on them is Trump's instincts. Despite all of his failures, he's still the only check on him. If Biden is there, there's no check on him. And that's to me is even scarier. A Biden win doesn't, I think, could bode very poorly for a wide range of ideas and ideals that the anti-war group has, that they have people populist on trade, people that are anti-censorship, all of those things. They're talking about packing the court. They're talking about opening borders. They're talking about changing all the rules so that they could, adding senators. It's just things that have never been meaningfully broached outside of rare chances in American history are now the common ideology within the Democratic Party.
Right. And then, of course, you've got the internet giants who are now increasingly arrogant. I think they're expecting, obviously, a Biden victory. But what they're now doing is, you're censoring the president. You lock out the Twitter account of the head of a government agency. You lock out, a major national newspaper. This is real arrogance. We haven't seen anything like this in ever.
And what's astounding is,
I would say that we also have never seen such a an avid tweeter as president, as we do see with Donald Trump himself.
What's fascinating is these big tech tools were thought of as a way of sort of surveillance capitalism, control of populations, manipulation of populations. And it reminded me of an art piece years ago. There was this guy who designed a playground to be a it was one of those interactive art pieces where people could interact with the art, and that was the idea. And he created a playground that didn't work. And he was making a point about childhood and whatnot. Well, the kids who interacted with it found a way to make the playground work, which was like the nature of interaction recreating an art piece. And what was fascinating is these tools that were meant to oppress became tools of freedom and liberty. And that's what I think shocked the political elites everywhere. That, Twitter was supposed to make sure the Obamas of the world dominate. Same with Facebook, same with YouTube, same with Google. It was supposed to help us control the populace and direct the populace and govern the populace, not be a means of populist rebels all around the world using those very means to communicate more effectively to get their message outside of the gatekeeper controls of the institutional press. And so Trump has revealed that times 10. It still drives him crazy that happened. And that's why they've been, but yes, you're right. Their arrogance just continues to exceed. The fact that the way they approach those hearings, here you have Google sued the biggest antitrust action since Microsoft, and their reaction is just to shrug. And that's what happens when you have a bunch of spoiled kids, which is what big tech billionaires are, a bunch of spoiled kids who've never been spanked. And they still don't believe they're going to get spanked even when dad's got them over the knee. And so that's what happens when you have this sort of spoiled, politically protected culture. It corrupts things institutionally. It's like the colonial empires fell apart internally, not so much from what made the window of opportunity for external revolution was internal corruption that ultimately undermined their ability to have colonial control in far-off countries. We're seeing the same thing in the West today, but it's with the institutional press, and it's with the deep state apparatus, and it's with big tech that is so disconnected and so corrupt, they don't understand the scope and scale of it, even when people are screaming at them about it.
Yeah, that's right. And it's very interesting that all the money, the big money, is going to Biden. The Economist endorses Biden. Wall Street endorses Biden. So, you can see, they know which side of their bread is buttered on.
It was my argument with a Quaker populist left professor from Larry Engel from Tennessee, because he was arguing against Trump and other things. I was like, all that, you can make those arguments. All I know is that the richest, most powerful people and the biggest part of the elites in America, all their money is with Biden. So they think Biden protects their interest a lot better than Trump does. So one way you can measure a populist is how the elite respond to him. And when the elite hates him, it's usually a sign of his bona fides. With Trump, who his enemies are is what leads to a lot of people to be allied to him. The fact that your Brennans and your Clappers and your Wall Streets and your Park Avenue and your San Francisco and Beverly Hills are all in D.C., all aligned with Biden, is all the more reason to vote Trump, in my view.
No, I also think that was the case in 2016. Voting for Trump was a protest within itself.
And I think still is. And I was very curious how he could manage to do that again. So I was like, how do you run as an incumbent and still be a protest vote? How do you run as an incumbent and still run as a rebel? How do you run as an incumbent and still against the establishment? Well, the media, the Democratic Party nominates somebody that is the penultimate corrupt version of the establishment. He's the dumbed down brother of Hillary Clinton. Has all Hillary Clinton's ideas. He's just slower, in terms of his mental capacity, and then in his political history. And then you make it even more corrupt with the media establishment being overt. I mean, that's the big game. That's the other thing. Big tech knows who's really winning the election because of their algorithms. They understand this with great, great detail. And the fact that they're willing to risk their reputation by overtly and openly censoring Hunter Biden related news tells you a lot about what the election really is. If the election wasn't close, they don't gamble in exposing to themselves to the world just how overt and open they are at censorship and control. They keep it subtextual like they have historically. For them to be so open about it means their internal algorithmic metrics are telling them that it's probably leaning true. Otherwise, you don't take that gamble. They're willing to press been willing to completely destroy any appearance of impartiality solely for this election to try to get Trump beat has really been extraordinary. There's no justification for what they've done with that. When a guy like Glenn Greenwald has to resign from a publication he founded and gave credibility to, tells you how bad and how far the press has gone.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's exactly right. Yeah. Well, I think that was fascinating insights, Robert. Much appreciated. You're going to be in the country, so you'll be following the election returns here in the United States.
Yes. Yep. Yes. So I'll probably me and another guy that I do a little legal broadcast with, Viva, are looking at creating like a special channel just to cover the election. Maybe something like that. But yeah, I'll be doing a live time, checking some different precincts, some counties, and hoping money does well.
Yeah. So this, because I've watched that Viva Fry broadcast. Is that's going to be live streaming on election night?
Something like that, or even creating a separate channel on locals, which Dave Rubin has created, create these sort of communities, so that people that are part of that channel will be exclusive to them. So that's what we may do. So we're playing around with it because I'm usually never available. I'm usually overseas, waiting on election returns, and the way to pay out, you have to wait. But this will be the first election in a while I'll be here in the States on election night. So trying to figure out some way to do that to help communicate to people. And it might be a crazy, crazy night if things are as close as people think it will be.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Robert. That was really, really fascinating insight. Thank you, Ciara. And I hope we will have you back soon after the election, and we can go over the result and any court battles that are pending. We hope not, but there may well be. So if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.